friends, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk with Wajahat Ali for the Left Hook Substack, where I invite a subject matter expert who's far smarter than me to break down one or more than one big question in 30 minutes or less. And today I have my friend Spencer Ackerman. He is, in addition to being a fantastic comic book writer, yes, he writes Iron Man for Marvel, but he just does that on the side, folks. He is the writer of Forever Wars. It is a fantastic newsletter. I've linked to it. Please subscribe. He's also the author of the American award-winning book Reign of Terror: How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump. And he's also a contributor, much like me, to Zateo. And we're recording this on 9/11, the year 2025, where 24 years ago, 19 foreign hijackers brought down the two towers and killed 3,000 people. And Spencer, I was at that time a 20-year-old senior at UC Berkeley, undeclared, saw the tower go down, and I knew immediately, being a student of this country, being a Muslim brown skin, that it's going to be bad. And this country overreacted. This country engaged in a war on terror. This country engaged in, some would say, forever wars against Afghanistan and Iraq. And then many people in this country, Spencer, said, you know what? We will voluntarily give up our freedoms and liberties in order to feel free. And we had the creation of ICE and Patriot Act. And many of us who marched said, hey, 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 be careful, because giving up your civil liberties, well, that's a bad idea. And strengthening the military-industrial complex, well, what happens if a person comes along, a president, say, and is authoritarian? He can use this against us. And here we are, the day after Charlie Kirk was murdered. We still don't have a suspect. And Donald Trump has already blamed the left. People on the right are declaring war against the left and Democrats. And the National Guard members are right here in Washington, D.C., and ICE agents are being deployed against Los Angeles residents. So who better to talk about how the failed war on terror produced the era of Trumpism than Spencer Ackerman? I gave you a lot, but I yield the floor to you. If you want to take the DeLorean and take it back to the war on terror, go for it. But if you want to start in the modern era, so be it. I'll go wherever you go.
Sure. Thanks, Waj. It's good to see you. Terrible day. Definitely my least favorite day on the calendar. The thing I want to start out saying, often I say this when people ask me to talk about the war on terror and its impact, its shaping impact on the America that we have today. I always want to start out by saying that the war on terror was a choice. The
Mm.
war on terror did not flow naturally from 9/11, just as whatever violent reaction it looks like Trump and the right are ginning up to the Kirk murder before anyone knows who and why the person shot and killed Charlie Kirk. That connection is less important to the prerogatives of power than the spectacle and the use and the justification of the atrocity. And that, I think, is really the enduring framework that we need to remember when considering not just 9/11, but the war on terror. It's not 9/11 that got us the world that we live in and that we've lived in for the past 24 years. It was the decisions of those in power, the complicity of those who were in the Democratic Party at that time out of power but still in government, to create this construct of a war on terror that becomes so many different things: an engine of unfreedom, a mechanism of wealth redistribution upward, and particularly toward the military industrial complex. Palantir would not exist
Mm.
without the war on terror. The permissive surveillance environment, the permissive environment for data capture and data processing and data mining to eliminate, or I shouldn't say eliminate, but constrain the space for someone to be free, not just in their speech, but in their associations, emerge from that era. And of course, we can't really talk about this without talking about, on the one hand, the nearly 3,000 Americans, I believe 29,000, I'm sorry, 2,974 murdered by Al Qaeda on 9/11. And then the estimates vary in a frightening way um, that begin on a conservative estimate. This is from the Cost of War Institute at Brown University, of 900,000 people killed by U.S. and allied actions, as well as by the uh, subsequent not just terrorist attacks, but insurgent movements and onward, uh, and all of the secondary but nevertheless derivative um, adverse effects on the ability to stay alive, the epidemiological effects of war, and war not in one country, not in two countries, not in three countries, but in, let's count them off, Afghanistan,
Yep.
Iraq, Pakistan, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, uh, eventually into Niger, eventually into briefly Mali. Um, and now, even outside of those battlefields, the impacts of the war on terror felt uh, all throughout the globe. We should also say the Philippines as well. That's a very lesser noticed theater at the beginning of the war on terror, but also an important one for particularly U.S. Army Special Forces, whether, the Green Berets and then, at the elite level Delta Force. Um, so many of the violent upheavals of the war on terror went to places that their architects likely did not anticipate. But importantly, the millions of people that you referenced earlier protesting the war on terror did anticipate, maybe not in all of their particulars, but in a great deal. When you have such overwhelming uh, warfare all across the world, you will create tens of millions, if not more, of refugees. People fleeing the war, people just trying to survive it. That refugee flow, uh, particularly out of Syria, out of Libya, when both the US overthrew Gaddafi and then when the so-called Islamic State arose in Iraq and Syria, that refugee flow into Europe and into the United States convulsed Western politics, brought the veneer of liberalism off of, to the degree it persisted, off of the United States and Europe, and inaugurated a new opportunity, latent always within the war on terror, growing from 9/11 onward, for nativist politics to step right through that door. Here in the United States, we saw that with Trump. In various European countries, you see that elsewhere. Certainly, Israel and Palestine become probably the thing waiting in the wings very often throughout the war on terror to take precedence. The beginning of the war on terror coincides with the Israeli suppression of the Second Intifada, and the creation of the 21st century version of Israeli apartheid, which is, as the journalist Anthony Lowenstein calls, a laboratory.
Yep.
His book is called The Palestine Laboratory, a laboratory of surveillance, assassination methods, unfreedom, and now AI-enabled warfare, in particular
Which they
targeting.
shared with the United States.
Yes, without a doubt, that develops in Israel. Oftentimes, it also develops in America, oftentimes commingled together in the elaborate market created by states at war for mechanisms of battlefield supremacy, and for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance tools, and so on. Um, so in the United States, there was from the very beginning of the War on Terror, uh, a declaration that the United States was not going to apologize for American power anymore. It was
Yep.
simply going to assert it. It was not going to hold the broader mass of global opinion in any kind of due regard. It would violate that and view it as a mark of virtue. We see that not just in the American right today, but we see that really central in Israeli public discourse. Um,
We just saw last week where JD Vance said, I don't give a shit when it came to killing the 11 individuals suspected, alleged of being drug dealers. He said, I don't give a shit if it's a war crime.
that's right. And you also saw, um, I want to just be clear about something. The war on terror isn't the first time any of this happens in
Of
American
course.
history. The war on terror is shaped by a tremendous amount of the muscle memory, I often like to call it, that stretches back to 1619, that mechanisms of control that start out with settler colonialism, um, expand through manifest destiny, begin the era of outward and not just regional expansion of American empire. Um, then the Cold War also shapes a tremendous amount of how this new now global superpower um, views Americans as true Americans and as conditional Americans. And the war on terror in the 21st century, at a time in which American power was never greater, but rationales for American power were in short supply, comes to fill this Cold War vacuum. And here at home, uh, is used as a very potent tool, not just to silence dissent, but to divide people in the United States into real Americans and into conditional Americans, into Americans whose prerogatives must be obeyed and Americans whose rights need not be respected. I don't need to tell an American Muslim about that. I would give just one major example of what this war on terror was from the beginning here in my backyard of Brooklyn. At Forever Wars in the 20th anniversary of 9/11 in 2021, I published a three-part reported series about a neighborhood nearby me known as Little Pakistan. And right after 9/11, uh, the precursors of ICE, which were then known as INS, as well as the NYP and the FBI, went through this neighborhood, knocking on doors, slipping cards underneath people's apartment doors, putting them in mailboxes, saying, "Come in, we have to talk." A tacit threat of people being arrested, people being detained, people being deported.
Happened in the
Asked
Bay Area where I was living as well. Happened all across.
We had in New York hundreds of people rounded up and placed in non-criminal detention as so-called material witnesses to 9/11, interrogated, threatened, deported because they were Muslim in New York City. And like you say, this happened certainly not only in New York. There would be similar operations around the country, definitely in the DC, Northern Virginia area as well. In a, a very short period of time after
You're kind of
9/11,
breaking up,
after
Spencer.
this,
Hold on. I want to make sure we got you
we
because you're
saw.
there. You go. I think I got you back.
Oh, sorry.
Your face is frozen. I got you on frozen
Sorry,
face.
Watch. You
Oh,
got
there
me?
you go. I got you back.
Okay, cool. Um, Long story short, um, no Pakistani was involved in 9/11.
Yep.
15 out of the 19 hijackers, clearly, we all know, Saudi nationals. Um, Relations between those hijackers and the Saudi government have remained, thanks to government suppression here in the United States, a matter of speculation ever since. There's a lawsuit that keeps on getting suppressed and brought back in the courts to try and find out those connections. Um, I believe, I could be wrong about this number off the top of my head, but at something like 15,000 New Yorkers in this one neighborhood fled. They fled to Toronto and other parts of Ontario, which is a quick bus and train ride up. But we don't often think of it like this, but 9/11 created refugees from the United States.
Mm.
9/11, I shouldn't say 9/11, the war on terror, to speak to my earlier point, caught myself slipping there, created refugees, political refugees from the United States, American Muslims fearing for their freedom, immigrants, second, third generation, fearing for their freedom, a place that they had come to contribute to try and get wealthier, to try and live freer lives, to provide a better life for their children and their families.
And
That
also
was taken from
NCR's, the registry program that they had in place, which they used to deport thousands of innocent immigrants. Also, like you said, mass surveillance of Muslims simply for being Muslim, grocery stores, mosque crawlers, community rakers. This happened all across. It happened when I was living in the Bay Area. People coming into mosques, FBI agents and law enforcement lying to the imams in the communities, saying, "Oh yeah, thank you for your partnership," and then turning around and spying on them.
The NYPD became a secret police. You use the term rakers, just in case your listeners aren't familiar with that. That's a term from the NYPD, from an intelligence chief of it that was seconded from the CIA. At one point, there was an active CIA officer in the NYPD dealing with this program. Rakers meant this is in the jargon of law enforcement at the time, in the NYPD, rake the coals of a community to try and see what embers were burning underneath. What that means is they spied on communities. They spied on Muslim New York neighborhoods, Bay Ridge, Jackson Heights, Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, in order to find some form of attributable crime to Muslims in New York. This becomes a program where the NYPD sends someone on a whitewater rafting trip with a Muslim student group from Brooklyn College, which is right down the street from me. It's you're laughing because it's absurd, but it's also risible.
Yeah.
This is the degree to which, with extremely little defense from mainstream American communities, entire populations in the United States came under what you might call pre-criminal suspicion, and apparatuses of intelligence and law enforcement working hand in glove with the rise of what we now call surveillance capitalism. Companies like Google and Facebook that collect a tremendous amount of data from their user base. Eventually, the apparatus of bulk surveillance, unconstitutional surveillance that begins a month after 9/11 at the NSA, eventually evolves to such a place where the NSA can, in some measure, mirror the servers of these companies, all without warrants. We exposed that when we reported on the Edward Snowden documents when I worked for The Guardian more than a decade ago. All of this unfreedom, NSEERS you mentioned, that was a database of Muslim travelers to the United States. I believe at the moment when the Obama administration, when it came in, ended NSEERS, it had over 80,000 names within it. Well, fun fact, the Department of Homeland Security still has NSEERS, because while Obama stopped additional collection in NSEERS, he didn't force the Department of Homeland Security to purge that data. And I could go on and on and on about
and also now we have Palantir, like you mentioned.
That's
now,
right.
Thanks to that, we have Peter Thiel, the billionaire who groomed JD Vance, literally connected him to Donald Trump, and now has the multi-billion-dollar contract for Palantir, which for those who don't read Lord of the Rings, is literally the sphere, the orb that was used to spy on people. That's the name of his company. And now the Trump administration is using Palantir to essentially, Spencer, I think it's fair to say, be a one-stop surveillance shop to spy upon and collect the data of American people.
Yeah, we saw with Doge earlier this year the funneling of Americans' data into centralized databases, which Palantir, I have no reason to disbelieve this from everyone I've told me, even though I couldn't tell you that I've looked under the hood of this or if I've even qualified to interpret it. Everyone tells me that Palantir is an incredibly powerful data mining suite, that its software is exquisite, that its value in finding connections amongst data profiles is unparalleled. I have no reason to doubt that from practitioners. We saw, news stories earlier this year of ICE, not only having contracts with Palantir, but ICE getting information on immigrants from databases that you would not expect law enforcement to have any access to. That's becoming increasingly the norm. All of that starts. How did that start? Palantir got through the CIA's investment arm, In-Q-Tel, I believe a 2 or 4 million, I forget which one exactly, but I think it's a $2 million initial seed money. All of this starts from the war on terror. There would probably not be a Palantir without the war on terror, and it took about 20 years from that to reach a maturation where this incredibly powerful company not only has unprecedented access to Americans' data, but unprecedented political connections to the point where, quite possibly, the person who takes over, should Donald Trump not make it through his first term, will be president of the United States.
And you talk about, and I'm so glad you're making these threads, because your book in particular and the work that you've done shows the threads, right? And I've tried my best, but you've done the work to hopefully listen to you, Spencer, is that, what the choices, and I'm so glad you said the choice this country made to engage on the war on terror, the choices that we made to engage in surveillance, the choices that we made to create the Patriot Act, the choices that we made to promote the bullshit narrative of weapons of mass destruction on mobile laboratories in Iraq, which was all bullshit, by the way, all pretext for war. The choice that we made to engage in Islamophobia at that particular time, go after the Muslims, right? Now it's go after the undocumented immigrants and the pro-Palestinian activists and go after, the invaders, right? But nonetheless, that was used as a vehicle to now create the entire systems that are now oppressing the American public. And another aspect of that, which I think is important, because it always begins with dehumanization first, picking on one group. We talked about the Reichstag fire. It was the communists, right? After 9/11, it's the Muslims. And Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are using the word invasion about the immigrants and drug cartels. Talk to us about how Trump deliberately used that type of racism and dehumanizing language, right? Because I'm old enough to remember where he said, I saw a bunch of Muslims celebrating after 9/11, never gave the evidence. Mm-hmm. He said, I think Islam hates us. He's the one who promoted the birther conspiracy against Obama, which was both racist and Islamophobic.
Yeah, you had, particularly in like the birther conspiracy, this like three-legged stool of nativism. You've got the Islamophobic aspect, you've got the anti-black racist aspect of it, and you've got the xenophobic aspect where Obama supposedly, comes from I forget where his dad was born all of a sudden.
Kenya.
Kenya, yeah, thank you. That, required a whole lot of groundwork that the war on terror laid. From the very beginning, advocates of the war on terror spoke about Islam in civilizational ways, that 9/11 was not the result of any material grievance that any particular organization, in this case Al-Qaeda, had against American foreign policy. Instead, it was Islam which hates us on the march to destroy the United States. That was as deliberate a shift away from any actual ability to redress the terrorism that killed 3,000 Americans and to direct it instead outwardly as a mechanism of vengeance control, exploitation, and entrenchment of American empire. From the very beginning, from like within the first weeks after 9/11 and the coalescence of the war on terror, voices within the Republican Party were obsessed with how the hijackers came into the United States legally and began calling for the militarization of the border, things like the border deployment that began in Trump's first term and never stopped and only intensified, that Biden did not take away. All of that begins almost immediately. An argument takes hold that America both simultaneously needs to defend its open society, but also can't afford its open society because of how scary Muslims will come and kill you. Again, rather than redress the material grievances that actually motivated 9/11. From there, Trump and his cohort grew in power because they sensed that there were elites in both parties who, while willing to license all of this violence and all of this unfreedom, were not quite willing to take the step of saying this is a civilizational assault by Islam. And there becomes this, particularly as then something really important happens in the war on terror, which is that it becomes a disaster. It doesn't become this satisfying moment where America gets revenge on the people who committed 9/11. It becomes this agonizing quagmire in which Iraqi and Afghan insurgents ensnare American troops into a nightmare,
Yep.
into a circumstance that they can't get out of, this roils American politics. And the easiest way to resolve this contradiction is to go out and peddle a civilizational myth that the reason why America is failing in the war on terror are because of these corrupt elites who won't properly name the enemy being Islam. This finally, after the rise of ISIS, which is the result directly of the unjustifiable illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq, ISIS rises, becomes something absolutely more terrifying and more nihilistic than Al-Qaeda, succeeds beyond Al-Qaeda's aspirations, seizes territory belonging to something like 6 to 7 million people. And that's when Donald Trump also causes these massive refugee flows that you'll remember from a decade ago. That's when Donald Trump comes down the escalator at Trump Tower talking about radical Islamic terror, talking simultaneously about migrants bringing crime and drugs from Mexico. These things
Rapists and
intermingle.
criminals.
Rapists and criminals from America, so often throughout the 9/11 era, so often throughout the war on terror, you heard voices on the right talking about the open borders that were allowing terrorist groups to smuggle Muslims. The joke at the time was they were talking about something called Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
And it took Trump taking that seriously. It took Trump husbanding that force and that outrage, and that transformed first right-wing politics in the United States and now all politics in the United States.
You know, I have you for a couple more minutes, and I know you're so busy because you're writing, but I want to ask you about this with a couple minutes that I have left. ICE. People forget, Spencer, you and I are old. We have gray hair. ICE is a product of the 21st century. This country didn't have ICE. Oh, and they always say, well, how can you say abolish ICE? We need ICE. And I say, we didn't have ICE. But no, we need ICE because we have to go after those goddamn Muslims and those invaders. Well, now ICE has been unleashed against American residents. ICE has the green light from the Supreme Court to racially profile, and thanks to the big beautiful bill, ICE now has a bigger military budget than most countries spend on their armies. It has the 16th largest budget, and now it has 10,000 agents. Can you talk to us about the war on terror directly led to ICE, which is now terrorizing, and my fear is will continue terrorizing Americans?
Yeah, if ever you want to look at how this demonic force grows from an egg into the maturation of the creature that it is now, ICE is a perfect example. It's also a very bipartisan example. A whole lot of people forget this, but George W. Bush did not set out to create the Department of Homeland Security. He resisted that. Initially, he created an Office of Homeland Security, basically a Homeland Security czar within the White House. The Democratic Party and some moderate Republicans thought this was not enough, that what needed to happen instead was a massive transformation of all of the different departments in the United States that had various domestic security components into this Frankenstein creation called the Department of Homeland Security, which I think very quickly became, with the exception of the military, the largest government department that we have. And central to the Department of Homeland Security, which was again predicated on counterterrorism, all of a sudden immigration functions come inside the rubric of counterterrorism, funded like it and armed like it. This became the transformation of the Border Patrol into Customs and Border Protection, which, contrary to what you might expect from the name, has the established legal authority to operate within 100 miles of any port of entry in the United States. That doesn't have to be the physical border with Mexico and Canada. That means airports as well. And then for interior removal, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. The Democratic Party at every stage joined with the Republican Party in not just advocating this, but funding it, expanding it. And in the early years of the War on Terror, when certain elements of the National Democratic Party, which weren't willing to perhaps oppose the foreign war aspects of the War on Terror, but wished, perhaps with some skittishness, to emphasize them slightly less, their alternative was, what we need instead to do is fund the domestic security missions of the Department of Homeland Security. That becomes ICE. First, they raid immigrants first they raid big workforces. This happens in 2006. There's a national raid in which little kids had to go to hide in churches because their parents were like rounded up in their workforces. This would be on in farms. This would be agricultural work. This would be slaughterhouse work. This would be dangerous work that capitalists in this country have always sought to give to vulnerable laborers in order to exploit them more effectively. So in that case as well, ICE became a force of labor discipline. That's something that shouldn't get overlooked in what ICE is. There's an economic component to this as well. And over the years, ICE just got additional funding. ICE got a bit of a deficit during the Obama years of public respect, but at the same time, still today, Donald Trump has not deported as many people as Obama did. Obama leaned more heavily on Customs and Border Protection, but as well, ICE starts getting a bit of what you might call political consciousness. And this is where we start to see the ascendancy of now the so-called border czar, Tom Homan, appointed under Obama and supercharged under Trump. Trump realizes that, much like the police unions that endorsed him, there's a tremendous nativist hunger for power within ICE, and he harnesses that. He becomes its champion. We are seeing now on the streets today ICE acting essentially as a private army for MAGA. There are many, many rumors that we have yet to get to the bottom of about the ways before the Big Beautiful Bill. ICE was hiring bounty hunters. Again, we don't have hard evidence of this. I'm not saying this. I don't think this is fit to print, but it's you and me talking right now.
Yeah. Well, the Washington Post did the interview, the recruits. The recruits are openly saying, I want to crush skulls. And then you have people on camera saying, well, the liberals are the worst. So you have ICE agents openly promoting the Proud Boys and militia. Like, you see it happening in real time, Spencer. And I call it Trump's Gestapo. And ICE is now being unleashed against American residents and immigrants in the U.S. Capitol, 20 minutes away from me, in L.A., and he's now going to go after Chicago. It's happening, folks, and all of it. And it's a very important point. This was bipartisan. This was bipartisan. For people who forget, the last thing I'll say, and I want you to come back if you can, and we could talk more about this. But folks, after 9/11, this country lost its mind. It was reporters, it was journalists, it was academics, it was researchers, it was TV hosts, it was elected officials. They all signed on. They all signed on to the war on terror. The people who opposed it, people like me and others, my God, the stuff they called us, un-American, traitors, jihadists. Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, was one of the sole voices who said, wait a second, maybe the authorization to use military force, maybe we might want to check that because that could be abused. She got death threats. She still gets death threats from that, right? We were on the right side of history. Unfortunately, we didn't have the power. And now you see people like Donald Trump and MAGA and hate mongers exploit it. Now we have Palantir, we have surveillance, we have data collection, we have ICE terrorizing the streets, we have forever wars, we have asymmetrical warfare, we have the mainstreaming of white nationalist conspiracy theories, Islamophobic conspiracy theories, and you have Donald Trump who rode that to power. Folks, and the last thing I'll say before shamelessly promoting Spencer is I always want to remind people that none of these people have been held to account. All these war criminals, most of them have never, ever apologized. And if I could just make a few of them uncomfortable today, maybe I've performed my karmic duty. Spencer Ackerman is the writer of Forever Wars, the newsletter. I've linked to it. He's the author of Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump. He's a Zeteo contributor and the writer of Iron Man. Spencer, shamelessly promote yourself. What did I miss?
You glitched out for me a little bit there, so I'm not entirely sure. But Reign of Terror is my book. Next year, Viking will publish my second book, which I'm still writing right now, which is a father and son story of the War on Terror. It's called The Torture and Deliverance of Majid Khan, and it tells the story of one of the people that the United States tortured the worst during the War on Terror, and the struggle of his father, who tried to stop him from going down the road that led to that, and the father being put under surveillance by the FBI while the son was in a CIA black site. As well, Iron Man Volume 1, The Stark-Roxxon War, that's in discriminating bookstores and comic book stores right now. Waller versus Wildstorm is a superhero spy thriller I wrote for DC Comics that's also in stores now. Forever Wars, you can find it forever-wars.com. You can see my stuff in Zeteo. And hopefully back on podcasts like my friends here.
Yeah, man. I will shamelessly promote you and link to it. Thank you so much. Everyone, be kind, be decent, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Thank you, Spencer.